It's really good to be back with everybody this week again. I really miss you guys when we have a break. We don't have many breaks like during holidays and stuff, but when we do, I miss you on the weeks that we kind of have an off week, and if somebody's away and we don't get to see them all the time, I've missed you. So just know that. And Tonight we're going to finish our conversations centered around one of the tenets of Ekklesia. So let me share my screen here. Everything has changed around. There it goes. I've got a new computer, and it's kind of, I'm still getting used to it. Things look a little bit different. And now it's asking me for passwords. Hang on a second, because it's the first time I've done it here. Let's see.
Never easy. Can't be easy with computers, ever.
Okay, sorry about all this, folks. There we go. Now maybe we're in a zone where I can see my screen. So just as a reminder, our vision for Ekklesia is that all seeking God would find their path and be inspired to never stop growing in faith. We do that by inspiring and encouraging people on their spiritual journey through inclusive, judgment-free community, open and thought-provoking conversations about God or the divine, and through inspiration from our neighbors' faith experiences that we share. And the tenets that we've gone through over the last few months: love God, others, and self unconditionally; protect and honor our no judgment space; respect multiple journeys to God and those who know God differently; actively listen to understand and celebrate our differences; embrace all seeking a path to God; inspire others on their path; seek joy and share it; and be a catalyst for positive change. And tonight is the one that we're going to circle back to, is respect multiple journeys to God and those who know God differently. And I got to thinking about this because two of our tenets are written kind of as two-parters. And we may look at this and jump to what we automatically might think are, when we say those who know God differently, maybe what comes to mind is of a different religion. Or maybe you see that and you think of those who know God differently as just those that encounter the divine in ways that aren't maybe the traditional fatherly figure. Perhaps it's more of an energy, an essence. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. And I hope that you will kind of think bigger with me a little bit tonight. I'm going to try to help us look at it from a lot of different vantage points. But because I'm going to try to keep this succinct tonight, if there's something that I missed that is something that is way you look at this tenet, or what jumps out at you as why this tenet is important to you as part of this faith community, I really want you to share it. And if it's not from the vantage point of one of the things that I've kind of prepared a little bit. So speaking of the things I prepared, the first thing that comes to mind to me is the origin of what we think of as the image of God. And when I think of respecting somebody on a different spiritual journey, perhaps they know God differently than I do, is going back to the source of how I see that person and what does the concept of the image of God mean to me? And how is that related to how I see others? So let's open with a little discussion about this question is what does the image of God mean to you?
I can put something out there if you want.
Tracy?
Oh.
Oh, thanks. I'll go first. Well, I don't
We're
really
still not hearing you. Is it just me? Do y'all
Can you
hear Tracy?
Can you hear now?
Uh-oh. Oh, somehow
Yeah.
I got muted. I'm sorry, Tracy. Go ahead.
all right. Well, I don't really think of how God looks, like when I think about a person, how they look. I don't really have an image of God in that way in a body. I think about the image of God through personalities of people that I know and love, or even strangers when I hear something they say. I think about the kindness that's shared with me and the love and just all kinds of wonderful attributes, their faith. Um, I think about those things about when I see an image of God.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Jim, you're unmuted. Do you want to say something?
Dan,
It's okay. Hi, welcome, Anantha. Good to see you back.
Sorry, I'm late.
We're asking the question of what is the concept of the image of God? What do you think of as the image of God and in relation to other people or how others see God or worship God and how you relate to other people?
God, that's been oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Has been a struggle of mine for a long time, and I still continue to struggle. But of late, maybe because the Ekklesia is influencing me in a very sinister way, but I'm beginning to kind of imagine God in people and places rather than the my image of God ever since I was in my boarding school days, always imagined Jesus on the cross, uh, depicted by famous Western painters, including Michelangelo or whatever, the people on the crucifix, nailed to the cross, and white man with long hair and a little bit of goatee, maybe a beard. And so whenever I imagine and prayed, that was the image I used to uh, have, and I used to resist it as I grew up, or maybe just submitted to it. And because questioning it meant that I'm inviting the wrath of God. I mean, it's like how could you question my appearance? I mean, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna smack you, and some bad things will come to you if you question that. That kind of stages I went through, and now I see actually in Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist, the way he describes, the entire universe is in your body, and all the particles, everything that's in the universe can be is actually is in your physical body, and I'm kind of thinking that unites all of us, no matter where we are, and also the higher power can be seen in that realm. Like I see God in everyone now, and in every significant place, I see the presence of God. So I'm in that stage now, how I imagine God, pray, or when I think of God. I don't know whether I made any sense, but that's where I.
It does. Thank you. I think I'm in that same place with you, Anantha.
All right, okay, so I'm not crazy.
No, you're not crazy. I might be,
I
but you. No, I just think I guess I have through the stories of a lot of people in Ekklesia, I have begun looking at seeing the essence of God, certainly in that more energy type of perception of seeing God in all life and all things, not just as a being per se, but as a kind of really in all things. And that's we've talked a little bit about that. Actually, I don't know if you were on when Jay Hartley was sharing a little bit about his personal story, but we talked about that a little bit. So yeah, I think it's not a way, because I, like you, I grew up with that
Right.
vision of, for me, it wasn't so much Jesus specific, but just thinking of God in terms of a being or a man, in my case, not just this energy and life form, feeding all life kind of a thing. So thank you. Anyone else want to share what your ideas or thoughts are on the image of God?
Create God.
I'll share.
Rachel?
Oh, go ahead.
Hang on, Jim. Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay. Um, it's funny because when I was little, it was always as a being. Um, and I never really considered God as a like actual physical face or anything like that until I watched Bruce Almighty and Evan Almighty when they had Morgan Freeman play God. And then that was one of the things where I went, oh, you know what? God could really be anybody and have a face, whatever face I picture or whatever being it is. I always just took it more of as an entity, as a being that would watch over and say, no, you go this way or that way, or that would guide. But that was probably watching that and seeing someone portray God was really interesting to me to go, oh, you know what? But God could have a face. God could be like, God could just be an entity. God could be whatever God wants to be. And that was how I've always now, like how I picture my mind of just this entity that could be anybody, anything, anytime, anywhere. Just a being.
Almost the reverse in some ways. Mm-hmm.
In some ways.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jim Mulvaney.
Well, I think people tend to create God in their own image. And then we create a God who we need God to be. If you're Japanese, you have a Japanese looking God. If you're Chinese, you have a Chinese looking God. If you're, that's the way it should be. And then you create the kind of God that you need God to be.
Can you describe, does God for you, that when you see the image of God, you're thinking in terms of it's just as unique as each person's perception of God is what they see. So what do you see?
I don't necessarily see an entity. I just see it's like in your head, there's a good part and there's a bad part. And you choose, am I going to talk to the good part today? Am I going to am I going to listen to the good part? Or am I going to listen to the bad part? So God is he's kind of the good part. And if you listen and talk to them, you'll end up with a good result.
That's interesting. Thank you.
It's so funny as you describe that. I picture the cartoons from when you have the angel and the devil on your
The good show,
shoulders.
unsold, or the good one and the bad one. That's right. Yeah.
Yes,
Anybody else before we move on? Yeah.
So the image is not the real thing. That's the first idea,
Ah, interesting. Uh-huh.
right? And then the second thing is, just like we learn about anything, we learn more about what it's not.
Oh, you're muted. Somehow it got muted.
We learn just as much about what a thing isn't as much as it is, right? So we learn chicken, and then we see a duck and we call it a chicken, and somebody says, no, that's a duck, right? And then we have to learn what's the difference between a chicken and a duck. And I think the path that I've been on in interacting with the image of God can't be separated from how I look at the image of God. That the path itself is making the image. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So today, what does God look like for you?
So, where did you all go? There you are. So at this point, there's multiple pictures, right? I can resonate with the idea of God being in everybody. I definitely see that. The words I would use is God is mediating every one of my relationships. Not just with people, but with things and ideas and places and all of that. That God is in the middle of that. God is still the finder. When I can't find my glasses, God is the one I ask. So God is the finder. And that just happens. It happened today. As the glasses fell between the bedstand and the bed, and there was no way I was ever going to find them. But I said, God, and then I looked between, and there they were, this little shadow of what looks like my glasses. So, I don't ever think I have two eyes that see life very differently. One that sort of doesn't work at all. It's all fuzzy. So I'm okay with an image that doesn't make sense. And maybe that makes me seem a little odd to people, that my image of God maybe sometimes doesn't make sense. And I'm okay with that because it makes sense to me that it would be beyond me.
Well, Jeff, it's your God, your call.
Well,
You
I
took
do.
the words right out of my mouth, Rick.
Yeah, right.
Before we go on, I do have one quick request of Jeff. The next time I can't find anything, I am texting you to ask God to help me find it because I have tried to find our God, but he doesn't visit me. And I have tried over and over. I won't go into a discourse, but I'll just leave it at that. And I know Jim Hartley wanted to say something. Because
I was just remembering a phrase I heard a long time ago that, God has created humankind in his image, and we have returned the compliment.
Mm.
And, so God is beyond my comprehension. Therefore, I really don't have a specific image.
I love that reminder that God is really beyond our comprehension. And the image isn't real, like you said, Jeff. It is what we make of it, like Jim said. Which, before we go on to the next one, let's hear from Ranu, because I think both Jims were saying is really something I'm going to sit with for a bit. Go ahead, Ranu.
Sorry, I was a little off. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'm a little under the weather too, so you have to excuse me if I end up coughing. Growing up, there was a lot of images. because of our traditions. And but early on, I also knew that there's something bigger than this. This is just a human interpretation for understanding. So because we're so, as a human, we have visual ability, right? Those of us who are fortunate to have that, and other sensory sources. So we have to use them to figure out things and understand things. So therefore, those images were created. But God is imageless, boundless. It is God is eternal, definitely genderless. This is something I've been trying to. When I speak of God, I don't put he, her. I make a conscious effort not to. Um, Even though in many cultures it's often a male gender, the bigger picture things. And I feel that that's just, you can't contain the concept of God because God is thought to be pure consciousness. So it is everything that the universe already is. So how can you imagine what the maybe the human side of God looks like? So it's bigger for me. It's really a universal concept. But I do see God in all the beauty that I see, especially in nature. That is where I see the image. And then in the beauty of those in action of people or other beings for that matter.
Okay. Thank you. That all ties together. I mean, I heard some similarities there through all of you. And that just reminded me, Ranu, I think I may have shared it early on with you, Jim Mulvaney, really early on when we were talking about God and Jesus and this dynamic. And for me, Jesus helped me understand that loving and hungry for relationship as I see it side of God, right? And so he made God relational for me in that way. And so that brings me to the next question. And some of you kind of touched on it, like Jim Hartley saying that you can't wrap your head around it somewhat. Naming God. We're going to do a session on naming God coming up in a few weeks with my friend Dawn Hartley, Jim's daughter-in-law. But I just want to take just a moment really quickly. Let's do a kind of a round robin on, are there names that you have for God that might be different than God? Or what about, are there words that better describe the relationship or connection, whatever, that you would like to have with God? What name best represents that for you?
Well, I would turn to 1 John. It simply says God is love. The word love covers it from my standpoint.
Me too, Jim. Thank you.
I think Almighty came to my mind. If there is no name per se, I would identify concept of God or God as Almighty, all-knowing, everything is possible. And there's grace, divinity, there's love, there's compassion, there's empathy, everything rolled into that Almighty.
Thank you, Nantha. Anyone else want to share their thoughts on names for God that best represent the divine essence to you?
I'm with Anantha on that one.
Almighty. Okay.
I think a lot of it depends on your mood. If you're in a very good, happy place and you're thanking God for someone, you might, call him something else. And if you're having a bad day, God might be the first word that comes, or there might be something ahead of the word God. So I think it's very mood dependent.
Hmm.
I agree with that. Um,
Hey,
when
Elaine.
I'm in a peaceful place, when I'm in a peaceful place, I like the name Yahweh. It's like the wind.
Hmm.
It blows by me like nature in the wind. When I'm in a panic, it's God. I lost Kenny last night at a concert and I got so worried. I was really frightened. And I finally asked God to help me. And a few seconds later, I found Kenny.
Mm.
I'll tell you about that later, but
For me, it's probably mother, father, the one who created us and everything else. One we always look up to.
Okay. And did you always have that, Sue? I'm curious because I know you didn't necessarily grow up in church. You found your way to faith community later, like as you're in your teen years, right?
Yes.
So did it change your concept of God from when you were young and not having any doctrines or traditions or any ideas put on you? What was your vision of God or your names for God or the concept of God then versus after you started going to a church?
Growing up, I just thought of God as someone up in the clouds or the sky, this all-encompassing being. I didn't really ever have a face for him. But my faith or what I believe and see is different than back then.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about how it's different?
I don't believe he's a being up in the sky anymore. I believe he's in all of us, in everything, created everything. We can always look to him, ask for guidance or his help, pray to him or her. But I don't believe he's somebody up in the sky. I believe he's inside everyone and everything.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm hearing that from several of you tonight. There's a common theme there of our ideas, our names, our visions of God that way. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think people that have been, I don't know, fortunate, that haven't run into some of the damaging influences of religion are, yeah, I can absolutely see why you describe God like that. The people that are manning this hotline 24 hours a day are hearing from people that are using a bunch of different adjectives for God. And the studies into the field of religious trauma and the people that are learning about the most effective ways to help the people that need to recover from it. That's a field in blossom right now.
It is. There's a lot of that. And thank you for bringing us there, Sarah, because I think it's very easy for us to, even in this community, to kind of feel like we're still kind of, in a way, speaking the same language for the most part. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important that we share our different perspectives, whether they're different religious perspectives or non-religious. Because like Sarah is saying, and thank you for putting that in the chat, there's a link that she just shared for recovering from religion, because religious trauma is really showing up to be very prevalent in certainly the United States right now. And I know that I myself have been on email lists for umpteen webinars and classes on helping people learn how to help other people who are trying to recover from religious trauma. And so, Sarah, when we talk about the image of God or naming God, can you speak to that a little bit in terms of coming at it from a place of no God or no necessarily name for God in terms of a being, but what about other possible references for divine or energy or any of that? Does any of that resonate for you?
I've often thought, and I'm certainly not the only atheist to make this to kind of make this comparison, that the closest that I've come to the feelings that I used to have when I was in church, especially the more kind of evangelical church settings, because so Anglicans aren't really evangelical. We sing a lot of hymns, and it's much closer to Catholicism than it is, and it's very prescribed. You stand up here and you sit down here, and it's not a lot of fun. But the evangelical churches, where there's a lot of choruses and standing, and swaying, and people speaking in tongues, the closest that I ever kind of got to the charge of being in those environments is listening to music that I really like, or being at a rock concert, or 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 any sort of concert, somewhere where everybody is really getting a charge out of the music and really excited about being there. There's a YouTube channel that I'm kind of obsessed with right now, where an opera singer who who looks at videos and listens to music of she does a lot of music from the 80s, a lot of metal music. She listens to it. She hasn't heard it before. She hasn't heard any of it. And then as she's listening, she analyzes it from an opera singer's point of view, but she's so excited about it. She's so excited about all these different points that come up in this music that she's never heard before. She's just delighted by it. And it's addictive, watching how much joy she takes in it and seeing her get so excited. And I watched a bunch of them this weekend with my boyfriend, and I watched a bunch of them last week. And I remember I've said to my boyfriend a couple of times after we've listened to a song that we both really like, as long as there's music like this in the world, I don't need a God. And if that's touching the same, as far as I'm concerned, if that's touching the same point in my brain that you guys call God, who cares what we call it? Who cares? Who cares who's right? Maybe it is God, and I'm the wrong one. Maybe there isn't a God, and that's just what you guys like to call the brain spot. Who cares?
Well, it's almost like there's no right answer or wrong answer. Again, when everyone defines God in their own way, it can be anything, anyone, or I like Sarah. You're absolutely right. There's times that you can hear music, and it takes you somewhere else into a very spiritual space. And it's just when that happens, it's amazing. So I mean, you're right. I mean, it's godlike because it just lifts your spirits. And then you listen to the kind of stuff that Michelle likes to listen to, and you crash back down to earth.
Thank you. Sarah, so did you finish your thought there? I want to make sure
I
you.
did. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And that's the point, is that we have so many, there are different ways that we see this. Perhaps it's not divine essence to you even as much as it's just that experience and being present in that joyful experience, which we might, or some of us may look at that and go, oh, I see spirit in that. But even if you don't see spirit in that, that is that we talk about seek joy and share it as well, because living life abundantly, that joy and that love that we talk about, that you tapped into that in that experience. So that is another way of seeing this from a wholly different perspective. So thank you so much for that. Jeff, did you, oh, sorry, Rhonda's got her hand up, and then we'll come to Jeff.
Oh, I just wanted to echo. I think I agree with what Sarah is saying, and it just resonated so much because I think that's what makes things so interesting for us as humans, right? Because we can access those divine moments of connection through things like amazing music or visual art or a meditation or the smell of beautiful flowers. I mean, that again is a gift from God or the source of our making, that we can experience these things. I think that was the whole point of our sensory system, is to be able to access that part of the divine. So by just limiting even the word God might be, it is kind of a capsule of a word, right? But the experience, I think, is what you have talked about. Do we really have to put a word to it? But we know there's divinity in that, and there's such a deep connection and something that brings us to the next level of what we call vibration, right? And I think gives us a chance to be a best version of ourselves when we can be in those states. So maybe that is when we're seeing God or experiencing God. I think it rises our state of our own higher consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that follow-up, Ranu. Jeff?
Back to Sarah and the music. Because it's the I thing, I don't resonate as well with visual stuff. And so I was in a class on making a vision board, and I made an audio board, which is basically a bunch of YouTube videos I strung together that sort of take me through different emotional states. And the very first one is a young guy under anesthesia being interviewed by his dad. Um, and he's sitting in the dentist chair. And the dad says, "You have a chair at home?" And he's like, "I have a chair at home. And I have a mom, and I have sisters. And who are you? You're my dad." And it's just hilarious. And he ends with, "My life is perfect." And yeah, so yeah, God is, yeah, for me, God is in that. Uh, Over and over again, because he's under anesthesia. He's using God's name willy-nilly. But that's not what it's about. It's about the fact that he's in this state of just wonder and joy and amazement at the very teeniest, tiniest things. And yeah, so thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, just to follow that up again, there is an atheist YouTube creator named Forrest Valkai, and he will talk forever with you about why there's no God and argue with you for hours and hours and hours. But at the same time, if you get him started talking about science, he'll say, "You know what's amazing? You know what's amazing? When you're sitting in a dark room he says, there's light that you can't see everywhere. And there's light, there's like, there's spectrums up there and there and there and there, and you're never sitting in the dark because, and then, and he'll go on and on and on and on. He says, and that's why I've never had a bad day in my life, because even when I'm sitting in the dark, there's the coolest stuff happening. There's stuff happening all around you when you're asleep and when you're waking up, and yeah, and he'll talk about that for another 6 hours. And and they have to actually stop him on his call-in shows because they're like, Forrest,
Come back.
easy, because he'll talk about how wonderful the universe is for hours if you let him. And then he'll come back and say, and that's why there's no God, because this is all science. Let me tell you something else about science. Let me tell you about. And if you look at him one way, you could think, yeah, he's the most spiritual guy you've ever seen. But because he is, he's just so excited about everything around him and so thankful for it and just wants to share that with the world. He thinks it has nothing to do with God, but it's just, the world is amazing and wonderful, and that is, and that's what Forrest looks like, and he's wonderful to watch.
Can you put his name in the chat for us? We want to try to find him on YouTube. Rick, let's go to Rick and then we'll go to Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. While we were talking about music, it just occurred to me. Back in the day when I used to do that for a living, 200 or 300 shows, however many I did, there was once or twice in that entire time when you could feel a spirit in the hall.
Sure.
Everybody was just overcome, and you could feel it on stage. I could feel it back where I was. You could feel it in the entire auditorium, that at this moment, all these spirits had come together. And it was a kind of it's not fair to say a godlike experience, but there was a feeling. We were in Des Moines of all places, and it happened there. And the show actually stopped, like in the middle, with like Bert going, "Can you guys feel that?" And the hall just erupts. And there was something like the stage hands like, "That in the act? No, this is not in the act." He just stopped the show because we finished showing it backstage. Like, could you feel it up there? Yeah. And he was just overwhelmed on stage. And you could tell the crowd, 23,000 people, were just all feeling the exact same thing at the same time. So that was one of the best examples I'd ever seen or heard of, seen or experienced of a universal spirit. And I kind of thought, well, that's kind of godlike. So, and I didn't think about it until, just now. So
maybe God lives in Des Moines.
I was just going to say.
God needs a life. I mean,
maybe Des Moines is a good place to be from.
Damn it, Jeff. I was just going to say that exact same thing. Yes.
Then he goes back there for, respite.
That's right.
Oof.
Thank you, Rick. Rachel?
I was just a comment from what Jeff was saying about having a visual issue. When I was little, I would get mad because I couldn't see without my glasses. And I would be so just like, I want to be able to do what everyone else does. And a friend stopped me and she said, "You're lucky enough to see the world in two different views. Because when you take your glasses off, no one else in the world can see what you see." And that was the point where I kind of fell into more of a visual. And now I take my glasses off all the time just to view the trees or view the world around me and see how different it is from when I have my glasses on to my glasses off. Because I get that chance to have two different worlds purely from a lens. But it was just something that struck me when Jeff was talking about how he goes more for the auditory. And I love auditory, I love music, and I do go for that. But now I went more into the visual because I have this wonderful multiple view. So I just wanted to touch base on that because I understood where Jeff was coming from, where you're just like, well, gosh darn it, I'm not seeing things where everyone else sees it, but sometimes it's better.
Thank you, Rachel. I love that.
So I'm going to read a story for you, and we'll talk about it. You may have heard the story. I had not. According to an often told story, it says, 3 U.S. prisoners escaped from a German camp during World War II. Because one man was wounded, it was necessary to travel by night. They finally made their way to a French village where an old priest sheltered them. Sadly, the injured soldier grew weaker and died during the night. The Americans asked if there was any available space in the church cemetery for the comrade to be buried. Knowing that the dead lad was a Protestant, the priest shook his head and said, "Only Catholics can be laid to rest in that cemetery, but we can bury him in the lot outside the fence." It was agreed, and the service proceeded, but the soldiers noticed that the aged priest seemed troubled. The following night, a strange thing happened. The priest assembled some of his parishioners, who took down the fence and moved it over to include the grave of the soldier. When the Americans inquired about the compassionate act, the old priest replied, "A Protestant's body may not be buried in the cemetery, but there is no rule which says we cannot move the fence to include the Protestant." Let us examine, well, we're going to talk about some scriptures that invite us to move some of our fences. But before we do that, does anybody have any fences in your own beliefs that have been moved to include new understandings?
Yeah. In fact, just on Friday afternoon, I attended a luncheon as a guest of Dr. Hector P. Garcia. I don't know how many of you are even aware of Dr. Hector P. Garcia. He's the Martin Luther King Jr. of Hispanic Americans. And he born and bred in South Texas. He was the first Hispanic who went to University of Texas Medical School, got his medical degree. When the time came to be included for the World War II U.S. Armed Forces, he was not taken in as a part of the medical corps. He went as an entry-level foot soldier because they didn't include him in medical corps because he's Hispanic. So in spite of that, he finally, I think it took Lyndon B. Johnson to give him a medical rank in the Army and employ him as a medical doctor. And when he was discharged, he became a phenomenal presence in South Texas. And he fought for Vietnam veterans' rights. The GI Forum is his creation in Corpus Christi. He's immortalized literally because he's from Corpus Christi. GI Forum is a Hispanic veterans organization. And and even now they fight for struggles for that. And so 3 years ago, the GI Forum. I mean, of course, Dr. Garcia is long gone; he's dead, and But my university, I mean, the Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi, has a statue of Dr. Garcia, Hector P. Garcia, and his papers are in the library collection. But the GI Forum just about 2 years ago had to fight for the right of a Hispanic veteran to be buried in a regular cemetery in the rural area, because the farmer adjacent to the cemetery objected to a Hispanic American being buried in the cemetery. And they had a long fight, and he was buried outside the cemetery. And when the court orders finally came, the fence was moved so that gravesite was included in the cemetery. So what a classic example you just when you mentioned it, what a shock to me. I mean, I just heard on Friday this story of a Hispanic American rejected by regular cemetery people to be buried there. And the same thing, and they moved the fence when he was buried right next to the cemetery.
And when did this happen?
This they said about 3 years ago. Actually, when Dr. Garcia was fighting for burial rights in the regular cemetery for Hispanic, it was an uphill struggle, and the court ruled, yes, they can be buried in the regular cemetery. I thought the fight was over, but the GI Forum president told me, he was sitting next to me at the luncheon table. He goes, Nantha, that fight is not over, because just 3 years ago we had a long court fight to, because Dr. Garcia died in the 1990s, I think, 80s or 90s. But this was 3 years ago, they were still fighting for that. So it's just an amazing,
Well, maybe this will mean that others can be buried in there now, and that'll be a precedent. Hopefully.
Yes, I think Dr. Garcia actually is buried in the National Veteran Cemetery in Washington. But others are still struggling. I mean, these are veterans who fight for the country. They come back and face this kind of a discrimination.
Mm-hmm. Anantha, can you put his name in the chat so we could more about him? Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Anyone else, or anyone metaphorically, fences that have moved or that you've seen moved as a result in your own spiritual journey, as a result of some inspiration from others or outside?
Well, I would say that even as you talk about the part of it of the worlds or we're religious, whatever, I think the last few years I've become much broader in terms of other religions and being respectful of them and not assuming that Christianity has the answers. In fact, Christianity's been going down in my image recently, because the more I hear about all the things that have been done in the name of the church over the years, the Inquisition, the Crusades, and all that, I just find it hard to believe how so many people in the name of Christ have been so un-Christ-like. So my idea is broader in terms of understanding people who are responding to God. And, even with Christian nationalism today, that's not what I believe the Christian faith stands for. And my fences are wider.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jim. Anyone else want to share how your fences have been widened? I'm kind of my first reaction to this was, oh great, they moved a fence. And then I went, wait, why weren't you more upset, Michelle, that there was a fence to begin with?
Fence is moving too.
My fence is moving too, Jim.
Well, just the idea, like, who put a fence around a cemetery? How, if they're going to come back to life, the fence ain't going to stop them.
Jeff, you're unmuted. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I don't know that I have any fences that are stable at this point. Yeah. So earliest, we'll go with earliest, right? I was raised Roman Catholic, and I saw a version of the Ten Commandments that had the thing about not having any images, right? And I'm like, oh, what is that? Why don't the Catholics say that? And I'm like, oh, there's statues everywhere. So that was like the keyhole, right? That maybe there's another way to look at this. And from there just been bigger holes and changes. The whole idea that how does Big Bang Theory say? I don't have a problem with the idea of a deity. I just have a problem with the idea of one who keeps attendance. Or one that doesn't understand developmental theory, or doesn't understand that human beings make mistakes. Yeah. So. Yeah. So the fences are moving.
Any thoughts on how all of this, fences, naming our concept of the image of God, or energy, or experience, that all of these things that impact our the way we see other people on their own journeys? Any things that is in terms of respecting multiple journeys to God and those who know God differently? Bringing it back to that, any thoughts on all these things we've just discussed and how that relates to this tenet for you?
I'm constantly amazed and awed by Hinduism's power of granting to the followers of Hinduism that subjectivity, that right to carve out their own space as to what God means, who God is, what the image of God should be. I mean, it's absolutely it's amazing how it's not dictated by something from top to bottom. One of the bestseller books published by Oxford University, many Ramayanas, meaning, Ramayana is one of the, the epic holy texts of Hinduism. And it says that, the many Ramayanas indicate that my Ramayana, or my reading of the Ramayana, is mine. I determine what I'm getting out of it, what it inspires me. While the next person in the same household can be reading the Ramayana, and that Ramayana is completely different to that person. So it grants that privilege or the right to decide what that means to that individual. So the many concepts of God, I mean, it's like 3 million gods, they say. Hinduism has 3 million gods, meaning literally everyone has an interpretation of what that deity can be, it could be a goddess, could be a god, could be both man and female in one concept of God. In fact, there are many Hindu statues in temples where half of it is a man and half of it is a woman. And the permission to imagine God in that sense gives that fluidity, that intellectual flexibility to engage God in many, many different forms. And Christianity is, in a way, rigid in that sense. It helps us what God should be. And you can deviate at your own peril, from that particular concept of God. But at least the way I grew. And that's one of the discrete charms of Hinduism, in my opinion, how that empowers the believer to imagine God in many ways, in different ways.
It's interesting. First of all, thank you for sharing that and pointing that out, because it's interesting, though, that your experience with, say, biblical scripture and through Christianity's been more rigid. But the tradition that I grew up in, as you were telling the story of the Hindu perspective on different interpretations, I thought, well, that's just like us. But that's because of the tradition I came from, encourages you to think for yourself. Well, ideally, I would have to say it's filled with plenty of imperfect people, but I would say for the most part, my experience, at least with religious leadership, has been to encourage that exploration and to welcome that interpretation that may vary. But like you said, it kind of depends on the tradition you're in, the box you're in. So as we've all seen on these journeys, like Jeff's talked about his early Catholicism to now as well. So, okay, well, let's it's time
Rachel,
for.
did you want to say something?
I did. I actually wanted to make sure, Rochelle, will you reiterate the question?
Yeah, the question, well, about fences, is that what we're talking about? No.
No. The second question.
About interpretation, like what I was responding to Anantha.
Putting it all together. Putting
it all together. Thank you. How,
Thank you.
in terms of our tenet, which is the theme of tonight, respect multiple journeys to God and those who know God differently, and how some of these things that these different perspectives we've drawn from the concept of the image of God, names for God, or seeing God as nature as opposed to a being, or our exploration of moving fences, how any of that connects to this theme of respecting multiple journeys to God and those who know God different. What is that relationship for you?
Okay. I wanted to make sure I understood the question before I answered. I think for me, what I see is, and it kind of refers back to what we were talking about earlier, and how people identify God or how people identify religion. And that's one of the nice things about Ekklesia, is these paths. To me, it's almost, again, I'm visual. Each one is their own beautiful path. Each one is their own, it's like watching a story or watching something beautiful play out. And when we talked even about music, and even when you talk about the fluidity of things, there is a music to this. Each person has their own art, their own story. And that's what I love, is that I've seen so many different religions that we've talked about just in Ekklesia, and different paths and each person's taken. And each one is so beautiful in its way, whether it was to God or coming back to God or doesn't involve God. To me, it's all kind of, it's just these really beautiful stories of how everybody has their own path, and no path is ever the same. It just won't be. Nothing is ever going to be exactly the same for each person. And that's what I love about this, is that you get to see all these paths, and they might be similar, but they'll never be the same. There's always something beautiful and different in each one.
Thank you. Rick?
Rachel said something very important. Well, she says a lot of things that are very important. Everyone here, not only in Ekklesia, but everyone around the world, each has a song or a music of their soul that they have. When you get a group together, like Ekklesia or like-minded anything, it's no longer a song or one instrument. It becomes a symphony. And the symphony becomes greater than its parts. And that, I think, is a really beautiful thing about Ekklesia, that as everyone has their own path, it mirrors, it contradicts, they all blend together into one contiguous thing. It's a group of individuals made, bound together, just like I said, as a symphony. And when you look at the entire thing, it's amazing. I think the more that we can see people and groups of people in that way, we'll find the rhythms of everyone, and we'll see how our music combines with theirs. And that could be like the old Coke commercial, I'd like to get the world to sing. But that's how I see a good bit, thank you, a good bit of Ekklesia. We're using God, I love doing that, as God as the conductor, and we're just the instruments. He's doing the conducting, we make the music. So that's what I get out of this.
Thank you. Thank you.
It might also be the last time I'm serious for a while.
I really appreciate all the conversation in the last several minutes. I think we can, the title of today's talk was Respect Multiple Faiths to God and Those Who Know God Differently. It's us that think that we are to know God differently from the from the full consciousness perspective. There's no disconnect. We're all fully connected and we're all one. And I think we keep forgetting, and this othering and all of that must be just for our small brains, right? Because we have to have those boxes to put things in. We have to be able to organize things in certain ways. So we just categorize things and we separate ourselves from each other even. And some of these very old and ancient philosophies, might be Hinduism, I'm actually very drawn to see how the indigenous peoples also conduct themselves when they're doing their daily human lives. They do everything with honor, right? And even how they speak, and when they're talking or conveying something, they take it from a very different non-egotistical perspective. They take it from that they are a part of a bigger entity, and that the entity is allowing them to move forward. And that is the guidance that they're getting. It's not an I, it's not even a we, is that the bigger powers to be because they're listening, is giving me the guidance. So if we remember that we are completely connected to one another, and we are actually from one source, and therefore we are one. And I'm not just talking about this blue ball, like the earth, I'm talking about the whole cosmos. Yeah, then you feel very supported, right? Because then we can say that, oh, the actions that I take will reverberate around the universe. It does matter. The words that I speak, the thoughts that I think. And maybe if we always say to ourselves, like, if I do this as an instrument of the divine, then I hopefully will be in chorus with the whole symphony of the cosmos. And if you think of yourself as one thread in the big tapestry, then don't you feel like you're part of something bigger too? You're not alone, but then we should work in harmony with one another. So I think these really ancient philosophies, because they're so old, like something like Hinduism and even these indigenous cultures, they go back 5,000 years, right? So what was there 5,000 years ago? Life was a little less complex with all these layers of stuff. It was still very much maybe even hunter-gatherer types. Some of them were extremely developed, but there was a different way of thinking, but very much connected thinking, connected to one another, connected to nature, connected to other higher powers, connected to the earth, you know. They felt things, they saw things, they observed, they honored. I think if we can kind of get back to some of that, and it's not, the history is there, and all the philosophies are there, we just can open ourselves and our hearts to that.
I think you said something very key there, open. That's one thing I really appreciate about this group and the different mixes of Ekklesia, sometimes on the Zoom, sometimes here in Granville, sometimes at the retreats. But that is something I think that everyone who comes into an Ekklesia circle has in common, is that we are open. Sarah and I were talking about that this week, is that she's always been curious about people's religions and hearing those stories. But she had to be open in the first place to even come on here. And then, as she told me, she was surprised she wanted to come back, you know, and what a God, that just made me feel so good that she wanted to come back. It wasn't just, I would agree to come back, but we have something here. And I think it's that openness. She had that openness in that situation, but we all are entering in these conversations with this openness. And in terms of respecting multiple journeys to God and those who know God differently, I think that openness is really key for, I don't want to say constructive conversation, because we're not trying to construct anything, but you know what I'm trying to say is that it has created and built upon this space for us to have more of this kind of dialogue that inspires, hopefully encourages, supports wherever we are. So I'm going to wrap it up. I had 14 other slides, guys, that I didn't get to tonight. Thanks to all of y'all really just having to say so much tonight. No, it was great. I loved hearing it, but I'm going to close us with one of the music videos for tonight. And then we'll say a little prayer and close.
There's a very rare occasion that I sit down with someone and have a conversation, and it turns out that they write a song for me called "The Wings That Fly Us Home." There are many ways of being in the circle we call life. A wise man seeks an answer, burns his candle through the night. is a jewel, just a pebble that found a way to shine? Is a hero's blood more righteous than a hobo's sip of wine? Did I speak to you one morning on some distant world away? Did you save me from an arrow? Did you lay me in my grave? Were we brothers on a journey? Did you teach me how to run? Were we broken by the waters? Did I lie you the sun? I dreamed you were a prophet in a meadow. I dreamed I was a mountain in the wind. I dreamed you knelt and touched me with a flower. I awoke with this, a flower in my hand. I know that love is seeing all the infinite in one, in the brotherhood of creatures, who the Father, who the Son. The vision of your goodness will sustain me through the cold. Take my hand now to remember when you find yourself alone. You're never alone, for the Spirit fills the darkness of the heavens. It fills the endless yearning of the soul. It lives within a star too far to dream of. It lives within each part and is the whole. And it's the fire and the wings that fly us home. Fly us home. Fly us
I'm going to close with a Taoist prayer tonight. It is, and I found myself moving the fence. I found myself also, in a way, seeing the Tao as another name for God. Every being in the universe is an expression of the Tao. It springs into existence, unconscious, perfect, free, takes on a physical body. Let circumstances complete it. That is why every being spontaneously honors the Tao. The Tao gives birth to all beings, nourishes them, maintains them, cares for them, comforts them, protects them, takes them back to itself, creating without possessing, acting without expecting, guiding without interfering. That is why the love of the Tao is in the very nature of things. Go in peace.